I'm booked at a hotel in the Catskills.
At 10 o'clock, all the girls go into the dressing room. Excuse me. Can I quit this podcast?
I told Eddie Murphy to stay in college so he'd have something to fall back on. I did great advice. Jackie, how about the lighter side of history? The lighter side.
I'm not done laughing at my joke.
Okay. I know a lot of things and I share them on the podcast and you don't care.
What are we talking about?
I can't get a word in edgewise on this show. I mean, it's...
Here's how we sell it.
Okay.
I don't know. I just know it's really dirty. And that's a real conversation.
But Jackie,
what a launch pad.
In those days, it was really dirty. The original Tonight Show with, it wasn't the original Tonight Show, but with Johnny Carson, when he picked up from Jack Paar, he was not allowed to use the word sex, let alone talk about sex.
Right. Just like Lucy, you weren't allowed, Lucy was pregnant, you weren't allowed to say the word pregnant.
That's right.
They had to cover her up and, you know.
I mean, boy, have times changed. You can say pretty much anything about sex now on the air. The ethnic jokes are completely verboten now.
Right.
In this day. That's the way comedy has changed.
You know, in the turn of the century, and I didn't know this until I went to see one of my girlfriends, my last girlfriend, had a friend. I hope he's still alive. I doubt if he is, because he was already very old. He was the baby man. He was the guy that they called when they needed a baby in the next room crying or screaming. That was his forte, which is so odd. But he was the guy. You know, he was the guy that could get that job done and make it exactly like he needed it. But his house was, like he had written a few, maybe episodes of F Troop or something like that. But so he had all this incredible memorabilia. And he had like an Irving Berlin record framed, and it was like something crazily ethnic. I don't remember exactly what it said.
All right.
But at the turn of the century, comedy was either German professors or Jewish brilliant people or Italian, like everybody had their slot. And like when the Marx Brothers did their first thing, which was called, I think, School Days, the professor had literally one of each kind of kid in his class, but it wasn't disparaging. It was like, you know, that's who they were and what they were.
And comedy has changed so much. You can see in an old Marx Brother movie, they're pausing for the laughs in the movie.
Right.
I was in a film history course out at SUNY Stony Brook in a room with about 60 undergraduates watching the Marx Brothers in Duck Soup. They're not responding, they're not laughing, there's not a sound, they're not getting it. They're simply not getting it. The movie ends, the lights come on, one of the college students turns to me and goes, "Which one is Chico?"
You know.
And you just shake your head.
But sometimes, I'll tell you this, sometimes I watch a Marx Brothers movie and I'm kind of mystified, and I can watch the same movie the next day and it'll get me. But even then, you know, Chico is
brilliant.
But he's got a little hat on, and he's an Italian.
Right.
He's a dumb Italian right off the boat, which is like, it's got to be so. I'm waiting for them to cancel the Marx Brothers. You know, like
I just have to say this. I recently saw an old show, The Bowery Boys, with Leo Gorcey and Hunts Hall. And you remember that.
Of course.
And they had the candy store, and Louis owned the candy store, and he's telling a story. And I'm laughing about this for days. I don't know why it hits me like this. And Louis is telling a story, and he goes, I love dry humor. He goes, and I remember that morning, it was drizzling. Man, was it drizzling. It's so ridiculous. It's so silly.
And so wonderful. You know?
And so wonderful. I mean, I
actually knew a guy out in California who, for a while, managed Hunts Hall, which is so funny. Like a grown man who was he? Not Satch.
Yeah.
Satch. You know, just characters.
Oh, what a wonderful show.
This guy, and I can send you this story. He wrote this story and sent it to his father because his father was a monstrous Milton Berle fan. And the name of the story is I Saw Milton Berle's.
Okay, well, that's legendary.
But he was with a booking agent, and the agent said, a famous agent named Willie Weber, who was the kind of guy who would get an act, and when the act got decent enough, he'd bail on him like Danny Rose and get a decent agent. But Willie Weber was the grandfather of, what's his name, on the flight sitcom. What Weber? Stephen Weber.
Oh, yeah, I remember him. They had that airline out of Nantucket.
Right.
Wings. Was it called Wings? I think it was.
Would you say it again?
The show was called Wings, I think.
Oh, Wings. I thought you said Lynx. I can't hear nothing. Yes, it was definitely that. And I ran into him at an autograph show, and he's a big fan. It really made my day because he was such a nice guy. But this guy, Willie Weber, is like, this guy's name was Frankie Ray Pirelli, and went by Frankie Ray, and he had been on Ed Sullivan with another guy. They were Aldo and Ray, and he managed Hunts Hall, and then he managed an all-midget orchestra, and then he managed an all-women's orchestra, and then he grew up, he was very close friends with Lenny Bruce. I don't know if you ever saw at my house, I had the signed check for $1 million. You know, it's not Lenny Bruce's signature, but it's a Lenny Bruce's check because this guy's good friends with him. And this guy Frankie did everything. He owned a comedy club in New Orleans called Wits End, and they found a dead body in the green room. And his partner was Shecky Green. When I met Shecky Green, I said, "Yeah, Frankie Ray's a good friend of mine." He's like, "What?" You know.
They found a dead body in the green room?
I don't know there's no Google, so
yes.
Who knows? But Frankie was such a character. But Willie Weber said, "I'm going to see Milton Berle. I need to talk to him. Do you want him to tag along?" Like 1948 or something. And his wife had just left him for the band, for Artie Shaw. So I guess he's all depressed and crazy. And they went up and they walked in his room, and he was lying on his bed, naked, smoking a cigar, reading the racing form, and in his fullest of
glory,
excitement. And
wow.
Like he said, I walked in the room and it was like, wow, like not only just wow, but wow, and then wow, But so he sent and his father used to say to him, Dad of Milton Berle, he's just so funny. He don't got to say nothing. He just walk out the funny walk. He got that funny walk. I just laugh every time. So then Frankie writes this story and tells his father that you wouldn't believe Papa Milton Berle's sausage. And he says, and his father, first thing his father said was, "Had the biggest sausage. No wonder he's a walk of funny." That's a great story.
And folks, this is a story coming from a guy whose nickname in high school was Pigs in a Blanket. All right? Let's put it that way.
Shorty.
Ask the children to leave the room. I never thought I'd say that on this podcast. It was Milton Berle in Hollywood and New York, and it was the actor Victor Mature, who were rumored back in the day to be the two most gifted in that respect.
And we talked about Forrest Tucker.
And Forrest Tucker from F Troop, which leads me to my one of my favorite comedic actors ever, Larry Storch. You know the expression "jump the shark"? It comes out of Happy Days when they had Fonzie actually jump a shark, and then when you watch that, you realize the writers are out of ideas.
Right.
Or
else they all quit.
Well, I like to think that some of the shows we grew up with jumped the shark on the first episode.
Right.
Because they were so ridiculous.
Oh, God.
My Mother the Car. F Troop, I loved F Troop. And you can't see it very much today. You can see it on YouTube because the politically incorrect treatment of the Native Americans, who I thought
had a premise.
They were the
was
funniest
stories.
Characters on the show.
Right.
But, toward the end of the run of F Troop, Larry Storch dresses up in a sharp suit, and he's going to manage a band called the Bedbugs. And they're dressed like the Beatles. And here we are, right after the Civil War, and he's managing a band called the Bedbugs that look just like the Beatles.
Which is
And
just so
It's
fun.
just so funny and so ridiculous, but they are really stretching
But some of those were actually shows. Like McHale's Navy was a real show.
McHale's Navy is not shown as much in reruns.
How did anybody ever buy Mr. Ed?
You have to. You just have to go with it. You don't
Mr.
believe
Ed
it.
sliding into home.
Oh, come on. It's possible.
And then did you ever read about how they made those?
How did they make
They
it?
put crushed, broken glass under his gums, so Ed would go like that.
Is that true?
Yeah, and it's like you read about that, and you're like, ooh, and then from then on, when you see the horse,
Oh boy.
Maybe they put. Let's just say it was dried cornflakes. Give them a break.
Here's a joke from Mad Magazine. Lassie, whom they referred to on the show as Girl, you go girl, was a male dog because a male collie has a fuller coat and actually looked better on television. And Lassie's friends used to make fun of him because he had to play a girl on TV. But they would exaggerate how smart Lassie was. Lassie, we're stuck here. Go get a screwdriver. And as Lassie's running away, wait, Lassie, don't get a regular screwdriver. Get a Phillips head. Flipper the same way. Flipper was doing nuclear formulas on that show.
You know what you get when you cross Lassie with a pit bull?
What?
You get a dog that chews you to bits and then goes for help.
That's a great joke. That's a great joke. I love those jokes.
Those crazy shows. It's just fun. So, the Friars Club, which was, for anybody that doesn't know, is a classic show business club started in the early 1900s by George Jessel and Al Jolson. They originally was throwing shows to raise money for charity or homeless or whatever it was, and then they said, let's get a place to do it. And they did these yearly or bi-weekly shows to raise money, and it became a famous club. And I was doing Dial Joke, and Henny Youngman got wind that I had my own Dial Joke. Henny Youngman did the original one for New York City. Whatever the thing was, it was actual Dial a Joke. And then at some point, I got asked to do Dial a Joke Blue, which from 12 to 6 late at night, it was a hair naughtier, but not really. But I had my own Dial a Joke, which and I actually have a cease and desist letter from New York Telephone saying, you can't use the expression dial a joke. It's patented. So I had to change it to X-rated joke line. I'm like, I'm one guy with two machines and you're the phone company. But it was with pride. So Henny Youngman finds out that I have my own joke line, and he has a grandson who's on and off every drug in the world. He eventually died. Larry, who's a nice guy. I actually hung around with him and Mark Simone and a bunch of people in the 80s, which is why I'm still friends with Mark Simone, even though we're like this politically. He's an old friend. But Henny wants to see if he can get something going, so he invites me to lunch at the Friars Club, years before I ever thought about, And I went to lunch with Henny Youngman at the Friars Club, and I made him laugh. And I thought it was a classic ad lib. It was very gentle. It wasn't all that funny. But he gave me the nod of approval. We're sitting there, and he kvetched about everything, this, that, the other thing, and he with the napkin here, and I made fun of him and Rodney for doing that. Now every shirt I got is full of stuff, and I'm like, maybe they had something there. But we're sitting there, and we're yakking and having so much fun, and he goes, what happened to our waiter? And I said, it's been downhill since high school. And he goes, you're very funny. I said, thank you, honey, thank you. But what a classic line.
Oh, right? That is a classic line.
It was great. And then funny people stay funny people. And I hope I haven't told you this already, but Soupy Sales was in very bad shape. he was old, he had a stroke or two, and then he was standing on like a Reiser, a platform, in the dining room of the Friars Club. That's where sometimes they had smaller shows there. And everybody's eating dinner and they're hanging out. And there's a couple people, and Soupy is standing there. And he didn't realize that there was like a foot of space. There was a curtain behind the stage, but the wall was a foot behind that. And I guess he must have stepped back or leaned back, and he went ass over head off the stage. And he really got hurt and broke his hip, and so he's a mess. So I'm walking into the Friars Club dining room, which is a small doorway. I'm walking in, and I got to know Soupy. He followed us on NBC, but
Sure.
I ran into him here and there doing joke shows. We had a small relationship. And he's coming out of the dining room, and he's walking with a walker. And I mean, he's had 2 strokes, and he's a mess, and he's 1,000 years old, and he's walking so slow with the walker. And just as I'm passing him, coming out the doorway, and he looks up and he says, "Jack, I went to the bank this morning, and I asked the guy to check my balance, and he pushed me." I said, "You old geezer, man." Nobody else could say that line. Oh my. He probably said the same thing to 400 people that day.
Yeah.
Just brilliant. That's.
Oh, and he should have said, and they just threw me off the dart team. I love it. I love it. I got to tell you this one. One of my biggest hurtful moments in comedy. The comic strip. And it's in Manhattan, and famous people would occasionally come in. And do you know who came in at the height of her beauty? She's still beautiful, by the way. She came in and sat center in the room, and you could see her from the stage. Olivia Newton-John, the love of my life. And I'm on the list, and there's
pretty and gentle
and so
slight.
nice. And there's 3 comics on before me, doing 20 minutes each, and then me. And all the comics are Olivia Newton-John isn't there, can you believe it? So I'm waiting, I want to get on for Olivia Newton-John. And she stays for these 3 comics at 20 minutes, and she's laughing. So I finally get introduced, and I walk up on stage, and I grab the mic, and I look at Olivia Newton-John. We actually make eye contact, and she stands up and walks out of the club. And I couldn't even go on for like 2 minutes.
Just heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking. Heartbreaking.
And it had nothing to do with you.
No,
But it certainly could have been, this guy doesn't look funny. Nobody would ever say that to you, but I would, just to be hurtful.
She would have said, "This guy looks preppy," which was what I probably looked like in those days. Oh, I bombed in front of some famous Alan King. Oh, I had a horrible set in front of him, and it was my fault. I was bad that day.
But the stories about him being such a dick, like he'd be a Catch a Rising Star writing stuff down.
Really?
And people say, "What are you doing?" He said, I'm taking some of these jokes. And they're like, "I can't do that." And he said, "I'm Alan King, I do what I want. Nobody's from this toilet's ever getting anywhere." Like that kind of pomposity.
That kind of attitude?
It could have been one comic, one time, but like you said, that's what's going to go around,
I was working as a maitre d' at the comic strip in the in the early 80s. Yeah, and they have the rope and you see people. Saturday night, first show, it's sold out, and there isn't an empty seat because they're selling every cover charge they can. There's not an empty seat, and there's 15 minutes to go in the first show. And in through the door of the comic strip walks Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase. Okay, he's big. He's left SNL and he's a movie star, and he walks in. And I'll never forget, he's carrying a Budweiser Tall Boy for some reason. You remember the Tall?
Sure.
And he walks in, and Lucian, the manager, is immediately, "Chevy, how great that you're here. We love you. Welcome. This show is over in less than 15 minutes now, but we will reserve a seat for you for the second show. It's just so great that you're here." And Chevy goes, I want to go in now. And Lou, no, there literally is not a seat. No, we don't have any seats, and the show's over in a few minutes, but we're going to save you a seat for the second time. I really want to go in now. And Lucian is explaining, no, I mean, he really can't. And Chevy Chase backs away from the rail, walks to the door, throws the Budweiser tall boy against the wall, and says, I bet you wouldn't even let the president in here. And he walks out. And I was standing right there. I saw it.
And from everything I've ever heard about him,
that's what they say.
Right.
I mean, that's what they say. But that doesn't take away from his body of work. He's extremely funny. He's extremely funny. Just like, what's happened with Woody Allen doesn't take away from his body of
and
work.
meanwhile, like you said, at the time, he's a red hot movie star. It's not like he's an old bitter guy.
No, he was
at
at the top. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I just
stuff like that. Did we talk? We're talking bomb stories. Did I tell you about the Concorde? All comics talk about the Concorde because people are rated by how many, because everybody leaves. Because the people are there for the whole weekend. Whatever they're paying, they get to see every show. So they see a show Friday, and they see a show Friday night, and they see the late show. And I worked a couple of those late shows at the Raleigh where, you do two jokes and they're going to bed, but once you know that, you can live with it. So everybody's, there's two sets of double doors at the back of the Concorde in full view of the person on stage. And when they open, of course, all the light comes in, and they would rate you by, was he a 2-door act? Was he a 4-door act? Stewie Stone used to talk about this all the time. Yul Brynner was a 4-door act, because this is in the 50s, 60s, whatever. He's a major, major movie star, and they book him at the Concorde. And I guess he got up on stage with a balalaika and started playing the balalaika, and it was asses and elbows. They couldn't get out quick enough, and they talked about it for years. Oh, Yul Brynner, a 4-door act. So I go there, and I'm on stage, and they don't like me, but you never know, because they might like it, they might not, they don't care, they're just leaving. So I just remember the doors opened up, and I lost half of them. I might have lost 2/3 of them, I might have lost a third. But in front is a big round table. I never told you there's a big round table with an old babe sitting there. An ugly old woman sitting all by herself, and she looked like Buddy Hackett. Of all the curses for a woman to look like Buddy Hackett. And I do my show, and it's horrible, and most people are gone, and I get off, and she says, you were so great. Because, I thought you were so much fun, blah, blah, blah. And she said a bunch of nice things, and I guess I must have went up to the maitre d' or somebody, and I said, at least somebody liked me. This lady in the front liked me. God, is she ugly? She looks like Buddy Hackett. And he goes, that's Buddy's sister. He said they haven't spoken in 40 years.
Wow.
She always sits in the front. She loves all the comedians. The dirtier, the better, And do you know what? To this day, I have never Googled to see if Buddy has and I think her name was Sadie or Sophie, like what Mad Magazine would have named Buddy Hackett's sister, a little stumpy, ugly pug
that's
face.
So funny.
But she was so nice. It was, and that was such an oasis in a sea of people leaving,
When I was in college at Northwestern, I took a course called Interpretation from a professor named Lilla Heston, who was Charlton Heston's sister and had that same gift, if you want to call it. She looked like Charlton Heston and could easily have played a gladiator. And I was doing a reading, because we did dramatic readings in the class, and unannounced, he walked in and sat in the back of the room when I was reading, and it suddenly went, Hamina. Wow, Charlton Heston. He was such an impressive actor. He did a promo for the college to raise money, and they gave him a script, and they had a big cue card for him to read. He goes, I'm not reading a cue card. You can always tell when somebody's reading. I was there. I saw that. You can always tell when somebody's reading a cue card. So he takes the script, and he goes and he stands in a corner. Hey, a new episode of Stand Up Memories every Wednesday.
How exciting is that?
It's starring me, Peter Bales, and right here, Jackie the Joke Man Martling.
Please follow us on social media. Search it out. What is it? MeSpace?
MySpace,
Your space?
TikTok, Instagram, Facebook.
Doodah, doodah.